All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to work on finding equations of lines. So far we have started with a graph or a table, and we've found things like what the slope are. Well, now we're going to go the other way. So instead of having a line where you're going to calculate the slope or you're going to graph the line, we're going to have either a graph or a table, and we're going to figure out what the equation of the line is. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. The way this paper is set up is each problem is kind of vertical. Okay, so step one is going to be find the slope. So we're going to find the slope for this problem. And then after, we're going to do step two with the same problem. So see, these guys are the same problem. All right, and then same thing in this middle column. These two are the same problem. And then these two are the same problem. Okay, so it's kind of broken up into steps there to sort of help you out a little bit. So we're going to do step one for all of them first, and then we'll go back and do step two. All right, so step one is we are going to find the slope. Now, if you have a graph, finding step one is pretty easy because you just have to count your slope, right? So remember, look for good points. So here's a good point. Here's a good point. Remember, we want them to go right through those little cross marks, right? So there's some good points, and I'm just going to count my rise over run. So say from here, I'd go up 1 and over 3. So my slope, my m, is rise over run 1 over 3. Okay, so that was pretty easy. All right, so step one is find the slope. And you know what? I changed my mind. We're going to finish this problem, then we'll come back and do the next one. Okay, so we found our slope. So now step two is that we need to find the y-intercept. Because to have slope-intercept form, you need to know the slope and you need to know the y-intercept. Okay, so the first thing you need to check is see if you already know it. Well, in this graph, we do. We do know the slope-intercept. I'm sorry, we know the y-intercept. Okay, because the y-intercept is just where your line crosses the y-axis, right? Well, there it is, right? It crosses the y-intercept, the y-axis at 2. Okay, so this guy right here, that's your y-intercept. We use the letter B usually to represent the y-intercept. So that was easy. So then for step three is to actually write your equation. So remember our equation, we're going to use y equals mx plus b, right? M is your slope. And b is the y-intercept. Those are the two things that we just found. So for my equation for this one, it's going to be y equals m, my slope. We said that was a third. So y equals 1/3 x, and then plus b, my y-intercept, 2. So plus 2, and we're done. Okay, so that's the equation when you're given a graph. So when you're given a graph, super easy. You just grab your rise over run for your slope, find where it crosses the y-axis, pop it into an equation, and you're done. All right, so let's take a look at how we're going to do this when we have a table. You can also do this if you have 2 points. Okay, because remember, we can always make a little mini table out of 2 points. So we're going to go ahead and do that with this guy. So again, the first thing we have to do is find slope. And remember, from a table to find slope, we're going to find change in y and change in x, right? So from here to here, okay, this number is getting bigger, and it's getting bigger by 1, so that's a plus 1. From here to here, it's getting bigger, so that's a plus 1. Getting bigger, so plus 1. Getting bigger, so plus 1. So my change in y is 1. And then on this side, these numbers are also getting bigger, but by 2s. So that's plus 2. From here to here, that's an added 2. From here to here, we added 2. From here to here, we added 2. All right, so my slope, my m, remember, is change in y over change in x. Change in y was 1. Change in x was 2. So my slope is 1/2. Cool. All right, so now we have to find our y-intercept. So the first thing that you want to check for yourself is, do you already know the y-intercept? Okay, well, yeah, we do. Okay, and how do I know that we know the y-intercept? Because any point that's on the y-axis has an x-coordinate of 0, right? So there's no sideways bit if you're just on the x-axis. Okay, so the way that you can tell, right, is, do you know if you already have it? You can either look at the graph, right? So we could look at the graph, right? Or look where the x-coordinate is 0. So when I check out this table here, Yeah, okay, look, when x is 0, y is 0. This is my y-intercept, and that makes this point right here the number I'm going to use for b. Okay, so the x-coordinate has to be 0. So this guy right here must be 0. Okay, and if that's 0, then whatever number this is your b. Okay, so we've got b here. All right, then step number 3, we're going to write our equation. So remember, we're using slope-intercept form. So it's going to be y equals m my slope. That was 1/2. So 1/2 x, and then plus b, my y-intercept. When this is 0, that's b. So I'm going to put plus 0 there. You actually technically don't even need the plus 0 because adding 0 doesn't change anything, right? So we could say that, or we could just call it y equals 1/2 x. Same thing. All right, then let's go on to our third one. All right, so third one, we're going to start this the same way to find our slope. So we're going to look for our change in y over change in x. So from here to here, this number is getting smaller. It's going down by 1, so -1. That's going down by 1. That's going down by 1. That's going down by 1. Okay, and then on this side, these numbers are getting bigger by 3. So that's +3. That's +3. That's +3. That's +3. Cool. So then my slope, m equals, remember it's change in y over change in x. So it's going to be -1/3. So my slope is -1/3. All right, excellent. Okay, the next thing that we have to do is we have to find our y-intercept. So first I'm going to check if I already know it. It's not a graph, so I'm going to look at my table for where x equals 0. Did they give me that information? No. I've got a spot where y is 0, but that's not what a y-intercept does, right? So I have to have an x-coordinate of 0 for this to work. So we can't do it the short way. Okay, so here's what we're going to do instead. We're going to choose any point in the table. So you can choose any point that you want. All right, and we are going to plug it into y equals mx plus b for x and y. So we're going to take any point. You can choose which one you want. All right, we'll talk about what makes it easier, what makes it harder in just a minute. Okay, so I'm going to take that. I'm going to plug it in for x and y into this equation. And then we're also going to plug in the slope that we just found, and we'll solve for b. Great. Okay, well, that was a lot of words. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. So I'm starting with y equals mx plus b. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a point from my table. You can choose any point that you want. It's just a matter of try to make your life easier if at all possible. So when I'm doing these, I'm going to look for an easy point. And a lot of times when I'm looking for an easy point, I want to look for points that either have zeros in them or have ones in them. Okay, so zeros and ones tend to do nice things for me. Okay, so I think I'm going to go with this point 40. Okay, so I'm going to use this where this is going to be my x and this is going to be my y. 1, 1 would have also been a pretty good point to do. Okay, but it really doesn't matter. You could do any point at all. Okay, so I'm going to go to this equation. I'm going to replace this x with that 4, right? And I'm going to replace this y with that 0. Okay, and then I'm going to plug in our slope that we found up here. We said m was -1/3. So I'm going to come over here for m, and I'm going to plug in -1/3. Okay, and then the b is the thing that we're trying to find. So I'm going to look plus b at the end. All right, so now we just have to calculate this. So those two numbers are going to get multiplied together, okay? And when you multiply fractions, right, remember you multiply straight across. So I'm going to just stick a 1 underneath this guy so that he's a fraction too, and then we'll multiply straight across. So -1 times 4 is -4, and then 3 times 1 is 3. Okay, so we got a little bit of a fraction here. No big deal. All right, and then I want to get b by itself, so I'm going to add 4/3 to both sides. And this is where I said before, right, zeros make things easier. That's why this 0 is nice. Because if I had any other number than a 0 here, I would have to add a fraction to it and do some actual math. And like, I don't know, that sounds like it'd be a little bit more work. So that's the nice thing about doing this when you use like a 0 or something. So I'm going to add 4/3 to both sides. So these cancel out. Okay, and then that's going to leave me with 4/3 equals b. Okay, so there's my y-intercept. All right, so again, what we did, I took y equals mx plus b. You can pick any point you want from the table. It does not matter. I just like to pick ones that have zeros or ones in them, if at all possible, because I think those ones are easier. Okay, so I picked this point 4, 0. I plugged in 4 for x, and I plugged in 0 for y. I plugged in the slope that we found up here in our table. Okay, and then we just solved for b. So I multiplied these guys together, then I added it to both sides to solve for b, and there's my y-intercept. All right, and then last step is we are going to write our equation. So it's y equals our slope, -1/3, x, and then plus b. So plus 4/3. And that's my final equation. Okay, so that's how you're going to find an equation of a line. When you're given a graph, pretty darn easy. If you're given a table where you have the y-intercept, and remember you can tell because the x-coordinate has to be 0, right? Then that's also pretty easy. Okay, if you're given a table where you don't know the y-intercept, you're going to have to do a little bit of work to figure it out, but you can handle that.